The first time someone told Josephine Edwards she was too plain for love. She had been only 14 years old, standing in the general store while her mother bought fabric for new curtains. The woman who said it, Mrs. Henderson, the banker's wife, hadn't even bothered to lower her voice, as though Josephine's feelings were as unremarkable as her face. By the time she turned 23 in the spring of 1878, she had heard variations of that sentiment so many times that she had almost started to believe it herself, settling into spinsterhood like a worn coat that no longer quite fit, but served its purpose well enough. Council Bluffs, Iowa sat on the eastern banks of the Missouri River, a jumping-off point for settlers heading west, a place where dreams were born and sometimes died before they ever crossed the water. Josephine had lived there her entire life, watching wagons roll through town filled with hopeful families, watching young women her age marry and start their own families, watching the world move forward while she remained still. Her father had died when she was 16, leaving her mother with a small boarding house that barely kept them fed. Josephine worked from dawn until well past dark, cooking meals for their lodgers, washing linens, scrubbing floors until her hands were raw and red. She wasn't beautiful, she knew that. Her hair was a mousy brown that refused to hold a curl, her eyes an unremarkable gray, her figure thin from hard work rather than fashionably slender. Her nose was a bit too long, her mouth a bit too wide, her cheekbones too sharp. Men looked past her the way they looked past wallpaper or furniture, noticing only when something needed fixing. The few times young men had called on her in earlier years, they had quickly lost interest, moving on to prettier girls with dowries and prospects. "You're a good worker, Josephine," her mother often said, which was meant to be a compliment but always felt like an epitaph for the life she might have had. "That's worth more than a pretty face." But at night, alone in her small room under the eaves, Josephine sometimes let herself imagine what it might feel like to be seen as beautiful, to have someone look at her the way the heroes in her few precious books looked at their heroines. She kept those books hidden in a trunk under her bed, reading them by candlelight when she was too tired to sleep, losing herself in stories of adventure and romance that had nothing to do with her ordinary life. Everything changed on a Tuesday morning in late April when Benjamin Irving rode into town. He came in with a cattle drive, 20 men herding 1,000 head of longhorns north from Texas to the railhead in Omaha. The drive had been delayed by spring floods, and the trail boss decided to rest the herd and the men in Council Bluffs for a few days before the final push. Josephine was hanging laundry in the yard behind the boarding house when she first heard the lowing of cattle and the shouts of men, the thunder of hooves that shook the ground beneath her feet. She paid it little mind. Cattle drives came through regularly, and the cowboys were usually more trouble than they were worth, drinking and fighting and disturbing the peace. Her mother had a strict policy against renting rooms to drovers, having learned the hard way that they often left without paying. Josephine pinned the last sheet to the line and picked up her empty basket, turning toward the house. That was when she saw him. He was leading his horse down the alley beside the boarding house, probably looking for the livery stable. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that needed cutting and several days' worth of beard shadowing his jaw. His clothes were dusty from the trail, his boots worn, his hat pulled low against the morning sun. He looked tired and dirty and completely ordinary, just another cowboy passing through town. But then he looked up and saw her standing there with her laundry basket, and he smiled. It wasn't a polite smile or a dismissive smile or any of the kinds of smiles Josephine was used to seeing. It was warm and genuine, reaching all the way to his eyes, which she could see were a startling shade of blue even from across the yard. He touched the brim of his hat in greeting. "Morning, miss," he called out. "Could you point me toward the livery?" Josephine found her voice, though it came out rougher than she intended. "2 streets over, then left. You'll see the sign." "Much obliged." He started to move on, then paused. "That's a nice boarding house you've got there. Your family's place?" "My mother's, yes. She have any rooms available?" "I'm looking for something quieter than the saloon, and I can pay in advance." Josephine hesitated. Her mother's rule was firm, but they did need the money, and this cowboy seemed different somehow from the usual rough crowd. "We don't typically rent to drovers." "I understand." He didn't seem offended, just nodded thoughtfully. "Can't say I blame you, but I promise I'm house-trained. No drinking, no trouble, just a clean bed and maybe some decent food. Haven't had a home-cooked meal in 3 months." There was something about the way he said it, a loneliness beneath the humor that made Josephine's resolve waver. "I'll ask my mother. Come back after you've seen to your horse." "I'll do that. Thank you, miss." He waited for her name. "Edwards. Josephine Edwards. Benjamin Irving." "Folks call me Ben." He smiled again, that same warm smile, and Josephine felt something flutter in her chest that she had long since given up feeling. "I'll be back shortly, Miss Edwards." She watched him lead his horse down the alley, then hurried inside to find her mother. Martha Edwards was in the kitchen, kneading dough for the evening's bread, her face flushed from the heat of the stove. "Mama, there's a cowboy asking about a room." Her mother didn't look up. "You know the answer to that. He seems different, polite. He offered to pay in advance." They all seem polite at first. Martha punched the dough with more force than necessary. "Then they get drunk and break the furniture. He said he doesn't drink." Josephine picked up a dish towel and began drying the clean plates stacked beside the sink. "And we do need the money. Mrs. Patterson is leaving next week, and the Johnsons are 2 weeks behind on their rent." Her mother sighed, the fight going out of her as quickly as it had come. She was getting older, Josephine noticed with a pang. More gray in her hair, more lines around her eyes. The boarding house was becoming too much for her, but what choice did they have? "1 week, Martha finally said. "Payment in advance, and if there's any trouble he's out. You tell him that." "I will, thank you, Mama." Benjamin Irving returned an hour later, clean-shaven and wearing a fresh shirt, though his clothes still bore the dust of the trail. Josephine met him at the front door and laid out the terms. $1 for the week, paid now, including 2 meals a day. No drinking, no guests, no noise after 9 o'clock. Agreed. He pulled the money from his pocket without hesitation and placed it in her hand. "I'm grateful for the chance, Miss Edwards." She showed him to the room on the 2nd floor, small but clean, with a narrow bed and a washstand and a window overlooking the street. He set his saddlebags on the floor and looked around with an expression of such genuine pleasure that Josephine felt embarrassed for him. "It's not much," she found herself saying. "It's perfect." He turned to face her, and again she was struck by the directness of his gaze, the way he actually looked at her instead of through her. "Better than I've had in months. You keep a fine house, Miss Edwards." Heat rose in her cheeks. She wasn't used to compliments, didn't know how to accept them gracefully. "Supper is at 6. Don't be late or you'll miss it." "I won't be. Looking forward to it." She fled downstairs, her heart beating faster than it should, annoyed with herself for reacting like a schoolgirl to a simple kindness. He was just being polite, nothing more. He would eat his meals, sleep in his bed, and ride out of town in a week, and she would never see him again. There was no reason to get flustered. But at supper that evening, when she brought out the roast chicken and potatoes and fresh bread, Benjamin Irving looked up at her with such appreciation that she nearly dropped the platter. "This looks incredible, Miss Edwards. Thank you." "The other boarder's Mr. Patterson. a railroad clerk, Mrs. Miller, a widow who worked at the millinery, and the Johnson couple, who ran a small dry goods store, barely acknowledged the food, as they had barely acknowledged the hundreds of meals she had served them over the months and years. But this cowboy, this stranger, looked at her cooking as though she had performed a miracle. "You're welcome," she managed, and took her seat at the foot of the table opposite her mother. Throughout the meal, Josephine found herself sneaking glances at their new boarder. He ate with good manners, engaging in polite conversation with the others, asking interested questions about the town and the people. When Mr. Patterson started complaining about the railroad company's latest policy changes, Benjamin listened attentively rather than interrupting. When Mrs. Miller mentioned that her son was serving in the cavalry out west, he expressed genuine admiration for the young man's service. He was kind, Josephine realized, truly kind in a way that had nothing to do with getting something in return. It was so rare that she almost didn't recognize it. After supper, she was washing dishes in the kitchen when he appeared in the doorway, his hat in his hands. "Miss Edwards, that was the best meal I've had in longer than I can remember. I wanted to make sure you knew that. It was just chicken." She kept her eyes on the soapy water on the plate she was scrubbing. "Maybe, but you made it with care. That matters." He hesitated, then added, "My mother used to cook like that. She passed when I was 17. I've missed it." The simple honesty of the statement made Josephine look up. His blue eyes were sad for just a moment before he smiled again, pushing the grief away. She understood that, the way you learn to keep moving because stopping hurt too much. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said quietly. "Thank you. It was a long time ago." He turned his hat in his hands. "Anyway, I just wanted to say thanks. I'll let you get back to your work." After he left, Josephine stood at the sink for a long moment, her hands idle in the cooling water. Something about Benjamin Irving unsettled her, though not in a frightening way. It was more like he had opened a door she had thought was permanently closed, letting light into a dark room. She didn't know what to do with that feeling. The next day was Wednesday, which meant baking day. Josephine rose before dawn to light the stove and start the bread, moving through the familiar routine with practiced efficiency. She made extra cinnamon rolls, though she told herself it had nothing to do with the new boarder, that she had simply felt like baking something special. Benjamin Irving came down for breakfast at 6, just as she was setting out the food. The other boarders trickled in slowly, but he was prompt, his hair still damp from washing, his smile bright. "Good morning, Miss Edwards. Something smells wonderful. Cinnamon rolls." She set the platter on the table, steam rising from the golden pastries. His eyes lit up. "You made cinnamon rolls. I might have to extend my stay." "Thought you had a cattle drive to finish," she said, more tartly than she intended. "I do, but a man can dream." He took a roll and bit into it, then closed his eyes in an expression of such bliss that Josephine had to turn away to hide her smile. "Lord have mercy. Miss Edwards, you're an artist. They're just cinnamon rolls." "No, madam, they're not. These are the kind of cinnamon rolls that make a man reconsider his life choices." He was teasing now, she could hear it in his voice, but there was warmth beneath the humor. After breakfast, while she was clearing the table, he lingered behind. "Miss Edwards, I hope this isn't too forward, but I was wondering if you might allow me to help with some of the heavy work around here. I noticed the front porch step is loose, and that shutter on the east side is hanging crooked. I'm handy with tools, and I'd be glad to earn my keep." Josephine hesitated. She had been meaning to fix those things for weeks, but hadn't had the time or the strength. "You don't have to do that. You've paid for your room." "I know I don't have to. I want to. Besides, it'll give me something to do during the day besides loiter around town." He grinned. "Plus, my mama raised me to be useful. She'd haunt me if I stayed somewhere a whole week without lifting a finger to help. Despite herself, Josephine smiled. Well, we wouldn't want that. The tools are in the shed out back. She watched from the kitchen window as he worked throughout the morning, repairing the step, fixing the shutter, then moving on to other small tasks she hadn't even mentioned. He worked steadily and efficiently, the kind of man who knew what he was doing and did it well. Other women passing on the street slowed to look at him, and Josephine felt a strange twist of something in her chest that might have been jealousy. Don't be ridiculous, she told herself. He's not yours to be jealous over. But when he came in for the midday meal, sweaty and dusty and grinning, and told her that the porch was solid enough to last another 10 years, she couldn't help the warmth that spread through her chest. Thank you, Mr. Irving. That was very kind. Ben, please. And it was my pleasure. He washed his hands at the pump and sat down at the table. This is a good town, Miss Edwards. You've lived here your whole life. Yes, born upstairs in the room you're staying in, actually. That's something, having roots that deep. I've been moving around for so long, I sometimes forget what that feels like. Where are you from originally? She brought over a plate of cold meat and cheese and bread, sitting down across from him. Kentucky. Little town called Bardstown. My father had a farm, nothing fancy, but it was home. His expression grew distant. He sold it after Mama died, couldn't stand to stay without her. We moved to Texas and he bought into a ranch down there, taught me the cattle business. Is he still there? No, madam. He died 4 years ago. Heart just gave out one day while we were working. Benjamin's voice was matter of fact, but Josephine could hear the grief beneath it. After that, I sold my share of the ranch and started hiring on with drives. Seemed easier than staying in one place with all those memories. I understand that, Josephine said quietly. When my father died, there were days I wanted to burn this house down just to escape the emptiness. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and for the first time in her life Josephine felt truly seen. Not dismissed, not overlooked, but seen. But you didn't. No, my mother needed me. And eventually the emptiness filled up with other things. Not the same things, but enough. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the kind of silence that didn't need to be filled with words. Then Benjamin smiled, lightening the mood. Well, I'm glad you didn't burn it down, because then where would I get these excellent meals? The days that followed fell into a pleasant rhythm. Benjamin worked on various repairs around the boarding house during the day, refusing to accept any payment beyond his room and board. He fixed the gate, patched a leak in the roof, rehung a door that had been sticking for months. In the evenings, after supper, he would sometimes sit on the front porch and play a battered harmonica, sweet melancholy tunes that drifted through the spring air. Josephine found excuses to be near him, though she told herself she was just being a good hostess. She would bring him lemonade while he worked, or ask his opinion on which vegetables to plant in the garden, or simply stand and talk with him about inconsequential things. He told her stories about the cattle drives, about the men he worked with, about the vast open spaces of Texas, and the challenges of moving 1,000 head of cattle across rivers and through storms. In turn, she found herself telling him things she had never told anyone, about the books she loved to read, about the dreams she had once had of seeing something beyond Council Bluffs, about the loneliness that sometimes felt like a physical weight on her chest. "You're a smart woman, Miss Edwards," he said one evening while they were sitting on the porch steps, watching the sun set over the river. "Too smart to spend your whole life washing other people's dishes. What else would I do? I don't have any other skills." "That's not true. You run this whole boarding house practically by yourself. You cook, you clean, you manage the accounts, you keep track of who needs what and when. That takes a sharp mind and a good heart." He turned to look at her, his blue eyes serious. "You could do anything you set your mind to." "That's kind of you to say, but it's not kind, it's true." He held her gaze. "The world has a way of making people feel small, especially women. But you're not small, Miss Edwards. You're not plain or ordinary or any of the other things I imagine people have told you. You're remarkable." Josephine's breath caught in her throat. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry or run away. "You barely know me." "I know enough. I know you work harder than anyone I've ever met. I know you're patient with your mother even when she's sharp with you. I know you leave extra food out for the stray cat that lives in your shed. I know you've got a good soul, and that's worth more than any pretty face. You're just saying that because I feed you cinnamon rolls." He laughed, the tension breaking. "The cinnamon rolls don't hurt, I'll admit, but I mean what I said, Miss Edwards." That night Josephine lay awake in her narrow bed, Benjamin's words echoing in her mind. Remarkable. He had called her remarkable. It felt like a dream, too fragile to examine too closely for fear it would dissolve. By Sunday, Benjamin had been there 6 days, and Josephine found herself dreading his departure. The boarding house would feel empty without him, without his cheerful morning greetings and his willingness to help and his stories that made the world seem larger and more interesting. She had grown used to him, more than used to him, and the realization terrified her. After church that morning, Benjamin had attended with her and her mother. Standing tall beside them in the pew, they walked back to the boarding house in comfortable silence. Martha went inside to start dinner, but Josephine lingered in the garden, not ready to give up the spring sunshine. Benjamin came to stand beside her, his hands in his pockets. "I talked to the trail boss this morning. We're heading out tomorrow at first light." Her heart sank, but she kept her voice steady. "I hope the rest of your journey goes well." "Miss Edwards, Josephine, can I be straight with you about something?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. "This past week has been one of the best weeks I've had in years, and it's because of you." He turned to face her, his expression earnest. "You're good company, you make me laugh, and you've made me feel more at home than I have since my parents died. I know I'm just a drifter with nothing to offer, but I was wondering, would you mind if I wrote to you? When I get to Omaha." Hope fluttered in her chest, dangerous and bright. "You want to write to me?" "I do, very much, if that would be all right with you." "Yes," she said, the word coming out before she could second-guess it. "Yes, I would like that." His smile was like sunrise. "Good, that's good." He reached out and took her hand, his grip warm and calloused. "Josephine, I need you to know something. You're beautiful, not in spite of anything, just beautiful. The most beautiful woman I've ever met. And anyone who told you different is a fool." Tears pricked at her eyes. She had waited her whole life to hear someone say those words, had given up believing she ever would. "Ben, I mean it. Every word." He squeezed her hand gently. "I'm coming back as soon as I can. Will you wait for me?" "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll wait." He left the next morning before dawn, but not before finding her in the kitchen to say goodbye. She walked him to the door, and he held both her hands in his, looking down at her with such tenderness that her heart ached. "I'll write as soon as I reach Omaha. Should be about a week. I'll watch for it. Take care of yourself, Josephine Edwards, and remember what I told you. You're remarkable." Then he was gone, walking down the street toward the edge of town where the rest of the drovers were gathering with their horses and cattle. Josephine stood in the doorway until she couldn't see him anymore, her hands pressed to her chest as though that could keep her heart from breaking. The days that followed were long and gray, despite the spring sunshine. Josephine went through her routine mechanically, cooking and cleaning and tending to the boarders, but everything felt muted somehow, less vibrant. Her mother noticed her distraction but said nothing, which was perhaps a kindness. 10 days after Benjamin left, a letter arrived. Josephine took it up to her room before opening it, her hands shaking. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in neat, careful handwriting. Dear Josephine, we made it to Omaha without incident, and the cattle sold for a good price. The trail boss is putting together another drive south to Texas, leaving in a few days. I signed on because I need the money, but my heart is back in Council Bluffs with you. I've been thinking about what I said before I left about coming back. I meant it, but I realize now that was selfish of me. You have a good life there, and I'm just a cowboy who lives out of his saddlebags. You deserve better than that. But Josephine, I can't stop thinking about you. About your smile, about the way you listen when I talk, about how you make the world feel like a place worth staying in. I know I have no right to ask, but I'm going to anyway. Would you consider marrying me? I know it's fast, and I know I don't have much to offer yet. But I've been saving my pay for years, and I have enough now to buy some land and start a ranch of my own. Nothing fancy at first, but a real home. I could be back in Council Bluffs by midsummer, and if you're willing, we could marry and build a life together. I'm not saying it would be easy. Ranch life is hard work, and there would be lean times. But I promise I would work every day to make you happy, to give you the life you deserve. I would cherish you, Josephine, every single day. Think about it and write back when you can. I'll wait as long as you need. Yours, Ben. Josephine read the letter 3 times, then pressed it to her chest and laughed through her tears. He wanted to marry her. Benjamin Irving, the kind cowboy with the blue eyes and the warm smile, wanted to make her his wife. She went downstairs and found her mother in the parlor, mending a sheet. "Mama, I need to talk to you about something important." Martha looked up, her eyes sharp. "This is about that cowboy, isn't it?" "Yes, he's asked me to marry him." "And you're considering it?" It wasn't a question. "I am. I know it's fast, and I know you need help with the boarding house, but Mama, he makes me happy." For the first time in my life, someone looks at me and sees something worth loving. Her mother was silent for a long moment, her needle still. Then she sighed and set down her mending. "Come sit with me, Josephine." Josephine sat, her heart pounding. "I've watched you these past 9 years since your father died, watching you work yourself to the bone, watching you put your life on hold to help me keep this house running. I've watched you accept what everyone said about you being too plain, watched you stop hoping for anything different. And I've hated it, but I didn't know how to change it." Martha reached over and took Josephine's hand. "Then that cowboy showed up, and for the first time in years I saw you smile like you meant it. I saw you come alive." "Mama, let me finish. I don't want you to stay here out of obligation. I'll manage somehow, or I'll sell the house and find something smaller. You're 23 years old, Josephine. It's time you had a life of your own." She squeezed her daughter's hand. "If this Benjamin Irving makes you happy, if he treats you well, then you have my blessing." Tears streamed down Josephine's face. "Thank you, Mama, thank you." That afternoon she sat down and wrote her reply. "Dear Ben, yes. 1,000 times yes, I'll be waiting for you. Yours always, Josephine." She posted the letter the next morning, and then the waiting began in earnest. The days crawled by with agonizing slowness. Josephine threw herself into work, helping her mother prepare the boarding house for sale, sorting through years of accumulated belongings, packing away the things they would keep and discarding the rest. It felt like shedding an old skin, painful but necessary. 3 weeks later, another letter arrived. "My dearest Josephine, I'm in Texas and I have news. I've found a piece of land for sale just north of Council Bluffs, near a town called Missouri Valley. It's about 1,000 acres, with good grazing land and a creek running through it. The price is fair, and I have enough to buy it outright with a little left over to build a house and buy a small herd to start. I'm settling things here and will be heading north by the end of the month. I should reach Council Bluffs by mid-July. Will that give you enough time to prepare? I'm counting the days until I see you again. I keep remembering the way you looked that last morning, standing in the doorway with the sunrise behind you. I'm the luckiest man alive. All my love. Josephine showed the letter to her mother, and together they began preparing in earnest. Martha sold the boarding house to a young couple from Omaha, getting a fair price that would allow her to live comfortably. She decided to take a small apartment in town, close enough to visit but far enough to give Josephine space to start her new life. Mrs. Miller helped Josephine sew a simple but pretty wedding dress from cream-colored cotton. Word had spread through town about the engagement, and the reactions were mixed. Some people seemed genuinely happy for her. Others, like Mrs. Henderson, the banker's wife who had once called her too plain for marriage, seemed almost offended, as though Josephine had broken some unspoken rule by finding happiness. I heard he's just a poor cowboy, Mrs. Henderson sniffed one day in the general store. You'll be living in poverty, mark my words. Josephine met her gaze steadily. I'd rather live in a one-room cabin with a good man than in a mansion with a cruel one. Mrs. Henderson had no answer to that. The 15th of July arrived hot and bright. Josephine woke before dawn, too nervous to sleep, and dressed in her new gown with trembling hands. Her mother came to help with her hair, pinning it up in a softer style than Josephine usually wore, weaving in wildflowers that matched the small bouquet Mrs. Miller had brought over. You look beautiful, sweetheart, Martha said, her eyes misty. Your father would be so proud. The wedding was set for 2 o'clock at the small church on the edge of town. Benjamin had sent word that he had arrived the previous evening and was staying at the hotel, observing the tradition of not seeing the bride before the ceremony. Josephine's stomach was in knots as she and her mother walked to the church, wondering if he would actually be there, if this was all some cruel dream from which she would wake to find herself alone again. But when she stepped through the church doors, there he was. He stood at the front of the church in a new suit, his dark hair neatly trimmed, his blue eyes fixed on her with an expression of such love and joy that Josephine felt her knees weaken. She walked down the aisle toward him, her mother at her side, and when she reached him, he took her hands in his and whispered, "You're so beautiful, Josephine. You take my breath away." The ceremony was simple, attended by a small gathering of townsfolk and a few of Benjamin's friends from the cattle drives who had come to stand up with him. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Benjamin kissed her gently, reverently, and Josephine felt something inside her click into place, like a door closing on her old life and opening onto something new and bright. The small reception was held at the hotel, with cake and punch and well wishes from the guests. Josephine found herself laughing more than she had in years, swept up in the joy of the day, in the solid presence of her new husband at her side. He never left her, his hand always at the small of her back or holding hers, as though he couldn't quite believe she was real. As the sun began to set, they said their goodbyes and rode north in a wagon Benjamin had purchased, filled with their belongings and supplies for their new life. The land he had bought was about 15 miles from Council Bluffs, far enough to feel like a fresh start but close enough to visit her mother. They arrived after dark, and Benjamin carried her over the threshold of the small cabin he had built with help from some of the local ranchers. It was just 2 rooms, rough and simple, but he had made it as comfortable as he could. There was a real bed with a quilt, a table and chairs, a cook-stove and curtains at the windows. "It's not much yet," he said, looking around with a critical eye, "but I'll add on as we can afford it. I want to build you a proper house, Josephine, with a real kitchen and a parlor," and she stopped his words with a kiss, her arms going around his neck. "It's perfect," she whispered against his lips. "It's perfect because we're together." He held her close, his face buried in her hair. "I love you, Josephine Irving. I loved you from the moment I saw you standing in that yard with your laundry basket, looking at me like I was just another nuisance to deal with." "I never thought that," she protested, pulling back to look at him. "Maybe not. But you didn't expect me to see you, did you? You were so used to being invisible." He cupped her face in his hands. "You could never be invisible to me. You shine too bright." They spent their wedding night in the little cabin, learning each other in the darkness, and Josephine discovered that love could be sweet and tender and overwhelming all at once. Benjamin was gentle with her, patient, making sure she felt cherished and safe. And when she finally fell asleep in his arms, she felt more at home than she ever had in the house where she was born. The next months were a blur of hard work and simple happiness. They woke before dawn each day to tend the small herd of cattle Benjamin had purchased, to repair fences, to plant a garden. The work was backbreaking, especially in the summer heat, but they did it together. Benjamin taught Josephine to ride, and though she was terrified at first, she gradually learned to love the freedom of moving across the open prairie on horseback. They made friends with their neighbors, other ranch families who were carving out lives in the Iowa countryside. The Martins, who lived 5 miles to the west, had 3 young children and a generous spirit. The Coopers to the east were an older couple who had been ranching for 20 years and had invaluable advice about weather patterns and cattle management. The Whitmores to the south were newlyweds like themselves, and the 4 of them often gathered for Sunday dinners, sharing food and stories and laughter. In the evenings, after the work was done, Benjamin would play his harmonica on the porch while Josephine sat beside him, mending or reading aloud from one of her books. He loved listening to her read, and she loved having someone who wanted to share in the stories that had been her private escape for so long. "You have a beautiful voice," he told her one night as she finished a chapter. "You should have been a teacher or something so you could use it properly." "I'm happy right where I am," she said, setting the book aside and leaning against his shoulder. "Good, because I'm never letting you go." By October, the ranch was starting to take shape. They had expanded the herd, repaired the barn, built a proper chicken coop. The garden had yielded well, and Josephine had spent weeks canning vegetables and making preserves for the winter. She felt a deep satisfaction in the work, in building something with her own hands. But there was something else, too, a secret she had been keeping for a few weeks now. She had missed her monthly courses twice, and her body felt different, tender and strange. She was fairly certain she was pregnant, but she wanted to be sure before she told Benjamin, when Dr. Morrison confirmed her suspicions during his monthly visit to the area. Josephine could barely contain her joy. She waited until that evening, until after supper when Benjamin was relaxed and content, before telling him, "Ben, I have something to tell you." He looked up from his coffee, his blue eyes curious. "What is it?" "I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby." For a moment he just stared at her, his expression frozen. Then he set down his cup and crossed to her, pulling her into his arms so tightly she could barely breathe. "A baby," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Josephine, a baby. Are you happy?" she asked, though she could feel his joy in the way he held her. "Happy, I'm—" He pulled back to look at her, and there were tears in his eyes. "I'm over the moon, I'm terrified, I'm both." He laughed shakily. "We're going to be parents. We are." He kissed her then, long and sweet, and when he finally pulled away, he was grinning like a fool. "We need to add onto the house. The baby will need a room, and we'll need a cradle, and we have time," she said, laughing. "The baby won't be here until late spring." But Benjamin was already making plans. his mind racing ahead to all the things they would need to do to prepare. Watching him, seeing his excitement, Josephine felt a wave of gratitude so strong it nearly knocked her over. This man, this good, kind man, had chosen her, had looked past what everyone else saw and found something worth loving. Winter came hard and cold that year. Snow piled deep around the cabin, and there were weeks when they barely left the house except to tend the animals. Benjamin had stocked up on supplies and they were well prepared, but the isolation was sometimes overwhelming. On those long, dark evenings, they would sit by the fire, talking about their future, about the child who would arrive with the spring. "What do you want?" Benjamin asked one night. "A boy or a girl. I don't care as long as the baby is healthy," Josephine said, which was true. "What about you?" "A girl," he said without hesitation. "A little girl who looks just like you. You don't want a son to help with the ranch." "We'll have other children for that," he said confidently. "First, I want a daughter, so I can spoil her rotten and teach her that she's the most important person in the world." Josephine smiled, resting her hand on her still flat stomach. "You're going to be a wonderful father." "I'm going to try." As winter gave way to spring, Josephine's belly swelled with new life. She felt ungainly and awkward, but Benjamin never stopped telling her she was beautiful. He doted on her constantly, insisting she rest while he took over most of the household chores. It drove her crazy at times, his overprotectiveness, but she knew it came from love. In late May, on a warm afternoon when the prairie was covered in wildflowers, Josephine's labor began. Benjamin rode for Mrs. Martin, who had experience with births, while Josephine paced the cabin, breathing through the contractions. Mrs. Martin arrived with practiced efficiency, sending Benjamin to boil water and stay out of the way. The labor was long and difficult. Josephine had never known such pain, waves of it that seemed endless, that made her cry out despite her attempts to stay quiet. Benjamin paced outside, his footsteps wearing a path in the dirt, until finally, just as the sun was setting, a baby's cry pierced the air. "Mrs. Martin opened the door, smiling. "You can come in now, you have a son." Benjamin rushed inside to find Josephine propped up in bed, sweaty and exhausted, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. "Ben, look at him. Isn't he perfect?" He sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at his son. The baby was red-faced and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that were trying to focus on the world around him. Benjamin touched one tiny hand with his finger, and the baby's fingers immediately curled around it. "He's got a good grip," Benjamin said, his voice choked. "That's a rancher's grip right there." "I thought you wanted a girl," Josephine teased gently. "I did, but this little fellow is going to do just fine." He leaned over and kissed Josephine's forehead. "You did so well, love. I'm so proud of you." They named him Thomas, after Benjamin's father, and he became the center of their world. Benjamin was as besotted as Josephine had predicted, spending every spare moment holding his son, talking to him, showing him around the ranch. Watching them together filled Josephine with a contentment she had never imagined possible. The ranch continued to grow over the next years. They added onto the house, giving Thomas his own room and adding a proper parlor. The herd expanded, and they hired a young man named Charlie to help with the work. Money was still tight, but they were making it work, building something solid and lasting. When Thomas was 2, Josephine found herself pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and the birth, while still painful, was quicker. They welcomed a daughter in the fall of 1881, a tiny girl with Josephine's gray eyes and Benjamin's dark hair. Benjamin wept when he held her for the first time, overwhelmed by the reality of this small life he had helped create. They named her Caroline, and true to his word, Benjamin absolutely spoiled her, but he also made sure she knew she was strong and capable. As she grew, he taught her to ride and to help with the ranch work, the same as he was teaching Thomas. Josephine loved watching her family grow, loved the noise and chaos of children, the way they filled the house with laughter. 2 more children followed over the next years. Another son, Matthew, and then finally another daughter, Sarah. The house was bursting at the seams, so Benjamin built an addition, giving them more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. The ranch was thriving now, one of the most successful in the area, and they could afford small luxuries, store-bought toys for the children, a new dress for Josephine, books to fill the shelves Benjamin had built. Through it all, Benjamin never stopped looking at Josephine the way he had that first day in the yard behind the boarding house. He never stopped telling her she was beautiful, never stopped treating her like she was precious. And Josephine, who had spent so many years believing she was unworthy of love, finally learned to believe him. One evening in the summer of 1888, after the children were in bed, Benjamin and Josephine sat on the porch watching the sunset. She was 43 now, her hair showing threads of silver, her hands marked by years of work. But when Benjamin looked at her, his eyes held the same warmth they always had. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, leaning against his shoulder. "How lucky I am. How close I came to riding past Council Bluffs that day without stopping." He put his arm around her. "What if I hadn't seen you in that yard? What if you hadn't convinced your mother to rent me a room? Then I suppose we both would have missed out on the best thing that ever happened to us." "You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Josephine Irving. You and those 4 crazy children in there." He kissed the top of her head. "I meant what I said all those years ago. You're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen, and every day I get to spend with you is a gift. Even the days when the children are wild and the cattle get loose and the roof leaks. Especially those days, because we face them together." From inside the house came the sound of children giggling, followed by a thump and Thomas's voice saying, "You're supposed to be asleep." Josephine started to get up, but Benjamin held her back. "Let them be young a little longer. They'll settle down soon enough." So they sat together in the gathering darkness, listening to their children and watching the stars emerge one by one in the vast prairie sky. Josephine thought back to the girl she had been, the one who believed she was too plain for love or marriage, and felt a surge of gratitude for the cowboy who had looked at her and seen something different. Martha lived to see all 4 of her grandchildren grow into young adults, passing peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78. She died knowing that Josephine was happy, that she had built a good life, and that was enough. They buried her in the Council Bluffs cemetery next to Josephine's father, and the whole family attended the service. As the years continued to pass, the Irving Ranch became one of the cornerstones of the community. Thomas grew into a skilled rancher, taking over more of the day-to-day operations as Benjamin grew older. Caroline married a young teacher and moved to town, where she started a school for local children. Matthew showed a talent for working with horses and started a breeding program that became quite successful. And Sarah, the baby, surprised everyone by announcing at 18 that she wanted to study medicine, and with her parents' support, she went east to attend a women's medical college. Benjamin and Josephine grew old together, their children giving them grandchildren, their ranch continuing to thrive under Thomas's management. They never lost the easy companionship they had found in those early days, never stopped enjoying each other's company. Benjamin's hair went white, and his back grew stiff from years of hard work, but his blue eyes never lost their sparkle. Josephine's hands grew gnarled with arthritis, and her steps grew slower, but her spirit remained strong. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Benjamin took Josephine back to Council Bluffs, to the spot where the boarding house had once stood. It was a dress shop now, completely transformed, but they stood there together, holding hands, remembering. "You ever regret it?" Benjamin asked. "Leaving your life here, taking a chance on a poor cowboy?" Josephine looked up at him, at this man who had loved her faithfully for 3 decades, who had given her children and a home and a life beyond anything she had dreamed possible. "Not for one single second." "Good. Because I plan to keep you for at least another 30 years. "Only 30, he grinned, that same grin that had first caught her attention all those years ago. "Maybe 40 if you can stand me that long. I think I can manage." They returned to the ranch as the sun was setting, driving the wagon up the familiar road, past the fields where cattle grazed, past the barn where Thomas was finishing the evening chores, to the house that Benjamin had built with his own hands. It had been expanded several times over the years, but at its core was still that original 2-room cabin, the place where they had started their life together. As they climbed down from the wagon, Caroline came out of the house with her 3 children in tow, followed by Thomas and his wife and their 5 children. They had prepared a surprise anniversary dinner, the table laden with Josephine's favorite foods, the house decorated with ribbons and flowers. "Happy anniversary, Mama, Papa," Caroline said, hugging them both. 30 years! The evening was filled with laughter and stories, the grandchildren clamoring for Benjamin to tell them about the cattle drives he used to go on, about the Wild West when he was young. Josephine watched from her chair, her heart full, surrounded by the family she had created with this good, kind man. Later, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Benjamin and Josephine sat on the porch in their rocking chairs, holding hands in the darkness. "Thank you," Josephine said softly. "For what?" "For seeing me, for loving me when no one else did, for giving me all of this." She gestured to the house, to the land, to everything they had built together, for making me believe I was worth loving. Benjamin brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "You were always worth loving, Josephine. I just had the good sense to realize it." He was quiet for a moment, then added, "You know, I still remember exactly what I thought the first time I saw you. I thought, there's a woman who's been working too hard for too long, who's forgotten how to hope for anything, and I wanted to give you a reason to hope again. You did more than that. You gave me everything." They sat in comfortable silence, rocking gently, watching the stars wheel overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled and one of the horses whinnied in response. The night was cool and clear, perfect for sleeping, but neither of them wanted to move, content to simply be together. "Benjamin," Josephine said after a while. "Yes, love. Do you ever think about how different our lives might have been? If you had ridden past Council Bluffs, or if I had sent you away, or if we had never taken that chance on each other, sometimes. And then I thank God that we didn't make those choices." He squeezed her hand. "You're stuck with me now, Josephine Irving, until the end. That's exactly where I want to be." As they finally rose to go inside, Josephine paused at the door and looked back at the land they had claimed, the home they had built, the life they had created from nothing but hope and hard work and love. She thought about the girl she had been, standing in that yard in Council Bluffs, hanging laundry and believing herself to be invisible. She thought about how wrong she had been, how much she had underestimated herself. But most of all, she thought about Benjamin, about the cowboy who had looked at her and seen beauty where everyone else saw plainness, who had believed in her when she didn't believe in herself. He had given her not just love, but the courage to accept it, to believe she deserved it. "Come on, beautiful," Benjamin said from inside the doorway. "Let's go to bed." She smiled and followed him inside, closing the door on the night, Tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges, more of the daily struggle of ranch life. But they would face it together, the way they had faced everything for the past 30 years. And that, Josephine thought as she climbed into bed beside her husband, as he pulled her close and kissed her goodnight, was more than enough. It was everything. The years that followed were gentle ones. Benjamin and Josephine gradually handed over more of the ranch operations to Thomas and his family, though Benjamin never fully retired. He still rose early most mornings to check on the cattle, to ride the fence lines, to do the work that had defined his adult life. But he also made time for the things he had missed while building the ranch. Things like long, lazy afternoons with Josephine, fishing trips with his grandchildren, and evenings spent reading the books Josephine loved. Matthew's horse breeding program expanded, earning recognition throughout Iowa and beyond. People came from as far as Kansas and Nebraska to buy his horses, and the Irving Ranch became known for the quality of its stock. Caroline's school flourished, and she became a beloved figure in the community, teaching 3 generations of children. And Sarah, after completing her medical training, returned to Missouri Valley to open a practice, becoming the first female doctor in the area. She faced considerable opposition at first, but her skill and dedication gradually won over even the most skeptical residents. Benjamin and Josephine were immensely proud of all their children, of the people they had become, of the contributions they were making to the world. But what made them happiest was seeing that their children had all found good partners, people who loved and supported them the way Benjamin and Josephine had always loved and supported each other. On a spring morning in 1895, Benjamin woke feeling unusually tired. He brushed it off, attributing it to age. He was 62 now, after all, and entitled to some aches and pains. But as the day wore on, the fatigue deepened, accompanied by a tightness in his chest that worried him. Josephine insisted he see Sarah, who came out to the ranch that evening. After examining him thoroughly, she sat them both down with a serious expression. "Papa, your heart is weak. I suspect you've had some minor episodes already. Maybe you didn't realize what they were. But you need to take it easy now. No more long days working the ranch. Plenty of rest. And if you feel any pain or shortness of breath, you need to tell me immediately." Benjamin nodded, trying to hide his dismay. Josephine reached over and took his hand, her grip firm. "We'll follow your instructions, Sarah," she said. "Whatever he needs." For the next few years, Benjamin slowed down considerably. He spent more time on the porch, watching the ranch rather than working it. He taught his grandchildren to play the harmonica, passing on the skill his own father had taught him. He and Josephine took short walks in the evenings, never going far, just far enough to watch the sunset over the prairie they both loved. "I'm sorry," he told Josephine one evening as they sat watching the light fade. "I know this isn't the life you signed up for, taking care of an old man." "Don't be ridiculous," she said firmly. "I signed up for you, Benjamin Irving. In sickness and in health, remember. Besides, you took care of me through 4 pregnancies and more stomach bugs than I can count. Turnabout is fair play." He smiled, though she could see the worry in his eyes. "I just want to be here for you. I want to see our grandchildren grow up. I want more time. Then we'll take the time we have and make the most of it." She leaned against his shoulder. "We've had a good life, Ben, a wonderful life, and it's not over yet." They celebrated their 40th anniversary in 1915 with a huge gathering of family and friends. All 4 children were there with their families, and the house was overflowing with grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. There was music and dancing and so much food that the table groaned under the weight of it all. Benjamin, though frail now, was in high spirits. He danced with Josephine, moving slowly but steadily, his eyes never leaving her face. 40 years, he said wonderingly. Where did the time go? I don't know, but I wouldn't trade a single day of it. Not even the day the barn roof collapsed during that storm. Not even that day. Because you were there, and we fixed it together. He kissed her then, in front of all their children and grandchildren, a sweet, tender kiss that made some of the younger ones giggle and the older ones smile knowingly. I love you, Josephine Irving, he said. You're still the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. And you're still a terrible liar, she said, but her eyes were shining with tears. But I love you too, Benjamin Irving, more than words can say. Benjamin lived for 3 more years, years filled with quiet contentment and the love of his family. He passed peacefully in his sleep on a cold January night in 1918, with Josephine holding his hand. She felt him go, felt the moment his spirit left his body, and though she wept for the loss, she also felt a deep gratitude for the 43 years they had shared. They buried him on the ranch, on a small hill overlooking the land he had worked so hard to build. The whole community turned out for the funeral, testament to the respect and affection they had for Benjamin Irving. Josephine stood beside his grave, supported by her children, and spoke the words she had been holding in her heart. You were the best man I ever knew. You saw me when I thought I was invisible. You loved me when I thought I was unlovable. You gave me a life I never dreamed possible. And I will carry you in my heart until we meet again. In the years that followed, Josephine remained on the ranch, though Thomas and his family did most of the work now. She spent her days with her grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandfather, making sure they knew what kind of man he had been. She tended her garden, read her books, and wrote letters to her far-flung family members. But mostly, she remembered. She remembered a young cowboy with blue eyes and a warm smile, leading his horse down an alley in Council Bluffs. She remembered the way he had looked at her and seen something no one else had seen. She remembered his kindness, his patience, his unwavering love. On quiet evenings, she would sit on the porch in her rocking chair, and sometimes she swore she could hear the faint sound of a harmonica playing, sweet and melancholy, carried on the prairie wind. And she would smile, knowing that somewhere, Benjamin was waiting for her, ready to welcome her home when her time came. Josephine Irving lived to be 84 years old, passing peacefully in her sleep on a warm summer morning in 1919. Her children found her in her bed, a slight smile on her face, her hand stretched out as though reaching for someone. They buried her beside Benjamin on the hill overlooking the ranch, and on her headstone, they inscribed the words he had said to her so many times. The most beautiful woman, the ranch continued to thrive for generations, passed down through the Irving family, a testament to what 2 people could build when they believed in each other. And though the world changed around it, though the Wild West gave way to modern times, the story of Benjamin and Josephine Irving lived on, told and retold by their descendants as an example of true love, of second chances, of the power of seeing someone for who they really are. In the end, it was a simple story. A cowboy and a woman who thought she was too plain for love. But sometimes the simple stories are the best ones, the ones that remind us that love doesn't require beauty or wealth or perfection. It just requires 2 people willing to see each other, truly see each other, and choose to build something together. And that, more than anything, was the legacy Benjamin and Josephine left behind. Not just the ranch or the children or the successful lives they built, but the proof that everyone deserves to be loved, to be seen, to be told they are beautiful. Because beauty isn't in the perfect features or the flawless skin or the graceful movements. Beauty is in the strength to keep going when life is hard, in the kindness to help a stranger, in the courage to hope even when hope seems foolish. Josephine Edwards had been called too plain for love or marriage, but Benjamin Irving had looked at her and said, "You're the most beautiful woman." And in doing so, he had given her the greatest gift of all, the courage to believe it was true. Their story became legend in Missouri Valley and Council Bluffs, passed down through generations as a reminder that true love exists, that fairy tales can happen to ordinary people, that sometimes all it takes is one person seeing you clearly to change your entire life. Parents told it to their daughters who worried they weren't pretty enough, who thought they would never find love. Teachers used it as an example of how words have power, how telling someone they are beautiful can transform them. The Irving Ranch stood for over 100 years, a monument to what Benjamin and Josephine had built. And long after the buildings crumbled and the fences fell and the land was sold to new owners, their story remained, a testament to the enduring power of love. Because in the end, that was all that mattered. Not the hardships they faced or the struggles they overcame or the success they achieved. What mattered was that two people found each other in a world that could be harsh and unforgiving, and they chose to love each other every single day for the rest of their lives. That was the real happy ending. Not perfection, but commitment. Not ease, but partnership. Not a fairy tale, but something better. A real love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. A love that changed not just two lives, but generations of lives that came after. And somewhere in whatever comes after this life, Benjamin and Josephine Irving are together still, his hand in hers, her head on his shoulder, watching over the family they created and the legacy they left behind. Because true love doesn't end with death. It transforms, it continues, it echoes through time. That is the story of the cowboy who saw beauty where others saw plainness, who offered love where others offered dismissal, who proved that the most powerful thing in the world is not strength or wealth or beauty, but the simple act of truly seeing another person and choosing to love them exactly as they are. And they lived happily ever after, as all the best love stories end, with two hearts beating as one, together until the end and beyond, forever and always, in the Wild West and beyond, in life and in memory, in the stories told and retold by those who came after. A love story for the ages that began with a simple truth. You are the most beautiful woman, and I will love you until the stars fall from the sky and beyond.